express feelings, as Michael was saying there, really, in Transport for London. The guys come along with one subject and then they feel no pressure, so they segue into something that is more. I found this with male groups, male therapy groups. You're talking about football one minute, suicide the next. But if you take the standard therapy model, which, right, we're going to talk about our feelings now. Sorry, Jimmy, football, no. That's banter. Once you think men who talk about football are just bantering and they're shallow and they're emotionally illiterate, you've lost the connection to your client. In psychology, in any kind of therapy, our aim is to connect with our client. So if someone wants to talk about football, that might be a way in to something that might just be preparing the trust, a little bit of connection, and then someone's more safe to go into something deeper. So we shouldn't set up services that say, right, you've got 50 minutes, talk about your feelings, I'm very pressurised, there's a long waiting list, you're a man, you're suicidal, you need to take, start now, because it sort of doesn't work so well with men, and quite a lot of women too. We need to focus more on our story. I think this is true of anyone, but this is something I often talk about with Michael. Anyone is more encouraged to talk. If you ask them to tell you their story, it's more inviting, isn't it? If you say, tell me your feelings, I mean, how many feelings are there? Anger, what are you going to say to someone? I feel angry at the moment. I feel a bit anxious, a bit angry, a bit depressed. Then where do you go from there? But if you say, tell me a story, it comes with all the context. And they say, well, this was my relationship, and you start to get them to know somebody. So I think this is true of women as well. When I do therapy with women, I don't sort of ask them to tell me their feelings. I just listen to their story, and women are just a bit more comfortable with going into the feelings a bit quicker. But there's no essential, as you say, human beings are human beings, but I think focusing on story is a much better way of doing any kind of therapy. And if you look at all the great interviewers on telly, they're just interested in the story of that person, aren't they? They bring out the story, and you get interested in if you're watching it. But if you look at bad interviews on the media, they say, how did you feel? And then you can see the person's shrinking because they don't. What can you say? And banter is a male. It's male language. Men use humour. A lot of banter. Men actually call each other ghastly words as a sign of love. When a man wants to show love to another man, he swears at him quite often. And unless you get the language of your client group right, you're never going to help them. And that's what the charity campaign against living miserably does very well. It uses male culture, rappers and street credible young men to use the language of male living, not medicalised sort of terms of mental health. I think one of their adverts is, are you feeling shit? Call this number. It doesn't say, do you have clinical depression on 3 points on the DSM-4. It just says, are you feeling shit? Because when someone jumps off a bridge, they're not really interested in how many criteria they meet for DSM-4. And it uses male camaraderie. Men are very loving. I mean, they're loving to their kids, but they might show it through protecting, providing, doing things. Men show love all the time. They show love by sacrificing, by protecting. They have camaraderie with other men in ways which are very, very, very valuable. So this idea they're all sort of Neanderthals, emotionally illiterate, they're all sort of avoiding emotion. Actually, no, they're showing emotion in a male-specific way. We've got to use activities that appeal to men. I'm trying to sort of set up some male-friendly services in a drug and addiction service, and just have a place where they can come and watch movies, talk to each other, have a chill out at the gymnasium. You start to get feelings from people, or you start to get processing stuff incidentally to doing things. You don't have to just be sitting there waiting to process an emotion. You get to process by doing stuff. You want to honour and validate all your clients. So with men, you have to do it in a male-friendly way. You use the male archetypes rather than trying to attack the archetype, you go with it. The most obvious way to, as I say at the bottom here, the most obvious way to go with the male archetype is to say seeking help is taking control, is being a man. So if we say to men, if you seek help, you're taking action, you're doing something, you're a man, not, come on guys, you don't have to be so macho anymore, just be vulnerable. If we frame our message as strength, and it's the truth anyway, isn't it? It is much, you know, it's a sign of greater strength to sort of seek help, so we've got to make it easier to do it. It is difficult for men to seek help, but it becomes impossible if we frame it to them as they've got to go against their own archetypes. And of course, as I say there, we should be getting alongside men more than getting inside. I mean, if you drive in a car with a guy or walk beside them, you'll get much more out of them than if you sit face to face. Just go for a drive. You know, we don't design services in a way that enables these ways of connecting with men to be more subtle. Right, at this point I think I'll hand over to you, John.
Brilliant. Okay.
Thank you, Nick, for your attention.
Thanks very much, Martin. I think I'm very safe ground saying that the field of psychology's got a lot of catching up to do, and Martin is way ahead of virtually everybody in the field. I mean, we really do need to have a big wake up in psychology. And one of the main reasons is because of the suicide epidemic, you might say, and the fact that it's about 3 or 4 times higher in men than women seems to be lost on most people, including psychologists. Now, you'd think that psychologists might be a bit more clued in than other people, a bit more sensitive perhaps. That doesn't seem to happen, not today at least anyway. What we've done, myself and Martin, back in 2011, we decided that we were going to get together with a few other people and try and do something proactive about this. And do it as psychologists, and try and use our skills, our ability, I suppose our standing as psychologists to try and do something concrete. We set up the Male Psychology Network, and this is our conference at UCL that we had this year. Some of you might recognise brilliant people like this. Oh, sorry, like Warren Farrell here. There's Martin at the back. Marv Westwood is there somewhere too. But I would encourage you, if you are interested in male psychology, you should definitely come to the conference next year.
John, I'm there as well, for those who want to know.
Okay, and Vincent is there too. Of course. That's the first thing people noticed, Vincent. So, okay, so we've got about 40 members. We're quite a small organisation, about a third of us women. And we've campaigned almost successfully to create a male psychology section of the British Psychological Society. And we're really, I mean, there's a lot of people to thank for that. Some of them are here today. And that will be a massive step forward for what we want to achieve. We have our annual conference, as I said, 23rd, 24th of June next year. We've, based on the conference this year, there's a special issue of New Male Studies going to come out in the next few weeks. And this is freely available online. You can read about some of the different studies that were presented at that conference. And you know, some of it is quite good. I hope I wrote some of it, so I think it's quite good. We've got a handbook of male psychology coming out soon. And we're fairly active in terms of research, given the size of the group. Here's some of our publications in the last 2 years. So the kind of things that we're interested in, primarily, I mean, I think our starting point, Martin, is suicide. It's just such an urgent issue, such an urgent issue. So part of what we've been thinking is suicide just to do with demographics, or just to do with kind of bits and pieces of other variables, or maybe it's something about the way that men think in kind of gender typical terms that might make us more prone to being suicidal. So that's one of our questions. And based on the fact that men seem to experience a lot of mental health problems, as shown by the suicide rates, and maybe shown in other ways, like by drinking more violence, some other things like that. And the fact that men aren't going to therapy as much as women, we've also decided we need to focus on whether we need to make therapy more male-friendly, so that men actually decide to go and seek help in some sort of way if they are feeling stressed. So then that's taken up some of our other time. And as a kind of an add-on to that, really, is and I think growing realization that in some ways the model that we have of therapy, psychological type therapy, might not really suit men all that well, by and large, in general. And there are maybe other things that men do to feel better about themselves and their life and the world around them. And it might not be sitting and talking to somebody about their feelings. In a way, I hate to say this because I'm a kind of, as a psychologist, this is not a brilliant thing I'm saying that lots of our clients might be better off going off and doing something different. But let's see what happens with our research. So, one of our first studies with Martin and Luke Sullivan, we did a large survey. We looked at how much male and female gender scripts, which is Martin's concept, had an effect on suicidal thinking, or I should say, are related to suicidal thinking. And what we found was that the male gender script of needing to be a fighter and a winner, so needing to be very competitive in life. The more people thought that they needed to be very competitive, the more that they said that they felt suicidal. Okay, so that was one correlation. And this is controlling for lots of other variables too. And this is, by the way, this applies to men and women. It's not just men thinking this. Also, we found that mastering control, and by that I mean needing to control your feelings, not feeling comfortable in just sort of talking about how you feel. The more you felt that you needed to be in control of your feelings, and the more suicidality people reported too. So these were two of our first findings. We also found, quite interestingly, that one of the what we call female gender scripts, and that is having a strong interest in family and children, and placing a lot of importance in that in your life. More interest in family harmony was related to less suicidality. So it seems that what we call female typical gender script of family harmony seems to be protective against suicidality. And so we published that in 2014, and we've recently replicated that survey, and we're getting broadly similar findings. There seem to be some differences, but we'll tell you about them at another talk. Now, another study that we're just getting, this is all very hot off the presses type data that you're going to see now. No, hang on, some of it isn't, some of it's published. Okay, so we thought it would be a good idea in finding out whether therapy works just the same for men as it does for women, that we should ask different therapists their opinions. So actually go to, say for example, life coaches, as in this first study here, and ask them whether they thought men and women benefited from the same sorts of techniques, or whether therapists have found that men and women might respond better to different sorts of techniques. So we interviewed 20 life coaches, and we found that 90% of them reported sex differences in some aspect of therapy. And what we didn't expect to find, but was quite interesting, that about 2/3 of them reported some sort of unease about reporting that they'd seen sex differences in their clients. We also we did a small study with therapists, 100% reported sex differences in their clients in terms of responding to different techniques or seeking help through different routes, etc. And we've just completed a study, we're about to submit it tomorrow as a matter of fact to a journal, of 20 psychologists and psychotherapists and counsellors. So I think probably most of them will be members of the British Psychological Society, so BPS has to take notice of this. 100% of them reported gender differences in some aspect of client needs. And what we found in that study was that men, by and large, men wanted a quick fix from therapy, and women wanted to explore their feelings. Women wanted to take a lot of time just to kind of talk about how they're feeling. And 80% of the therapists, again, showed ambivalence when they reported on sex differences. And so that, because it came up again in another set of interviews with therapists, this thing of saying, yeah, well, I see men want this, women want that, but showing some sort of unease about it, we thought that was quite an interesting thing. In fact, if you think about it, a lot of what Martin's been talking about is related to this kind of unease that we saw in the therapists. So typically, in fact, the title of our first paper on interviews with therapists was "I hate generalising, but." So typically, people would say things like, "I hate generalising, but I prefer this," and women prefer that sort of technique. And this was often a kind of men prefer a quick fix, and women prefer to talk about their feelings type of thing. We tried to understand what was going on here, and we thought that there's probably what we're seeing is cognitive dissonance being shown by these therapists. In other words, they're seeing something, they have the evidence of their own eyes to inform them of some particular thing. But there's some other part of them that's trying to sort of block them from seeing that. And so they feel unease, there's a dissonance within them when they try and tell you about these experiences. So this is a well-known type of phenomenon in psychology. We also thought it was interesting that we were seeing what's called beta bias. Beta bias doesn't get talked about very much in psychology. Psychology is often more interested in talking about alpha bias. Alpha bias is when somebody overemphasizes sex differences. Beta bias is where sex differences are ignored or minimized in some sort of way. I think what we were seeing was people struggling with beta bias. That they wanted to tell you about what they experienced in seeing their patients respond to different techniques, but they felt uncomfortable about it because they felt that they needed to minimize these sex differences. And also, one very powerful thing, I think, is what's called the gender similarities hypothesis. There was a very influential paper by Janet Hyde in 2005. This was a meta-analysis of sex differences for various aspects of psychology, cognition, and behaviour. And Janet Hyde did a kind of a big kind of table. I can't remember, about 45 or so different variables. And she found that in most cases there was no significant differences between men and women. Okay, there were some significant differences, but what she said was that there are more similarities than differences. So she decided that, in fact, we can kind of say that pretty much men and women are the same psychologically. For people like me who maybe suffer a bit from alpha bias and are interested in sex differences, what I'm thinking is, well, hang on a second, what about the sex differences? What about the differences? I mean, are they important differences? Are they differences in important areas that might, inform us about something about humanity, or maybe even have clinical importance in understanding suicidality or depression or acting out of various emotions. Janet Hyde wasn't that interested in those sorts of ideas. Although she said in the paper we should recognise moderate differences. So moderate effect size differences are things we should recognise. In fact, she had found for mental rotation ability, and that's the ability to imagine an object from various angles. Like, so if you can imagine a kind of an irregular stack of cubes, and you're shown one side of it, and if you're able to actually imagine what the other side of it might look like and imagine it accurately, that means you're quite good at mental rotation. And men tend to be better at this than women, to a kind of a moderate effect size, as they call it. Now, Janet Hyde found that, but she kind of, although she said that she was interested in moderate effect size differences, she didn't explore that any further and simply kept on talking about how men and women were overall similar. Now, there might be all sorts of effects of, by the way, we've, our research team at the Male Psychology Network have just submitted a paper, a meta-analysis of mental rotation ability in boys and girls as young as 3 months old, and we find that there is at least a moderate effect size even in young children, which this kind of suggests that if it exists at even 3 or 4 months old, it's probably innate to some degree. But this is probably not going to make us very popular with people like Janet Hyde, who would rather not have anything to do with those things. Because you might imagine, for example, that there might be an impact across the lifespan of having particular skills and abilities. But this is not a popular idea to discuss. So what we've kind of ended up, I think, with is a bunch of people, psychologists, who should be able to help with things like male suicide and be empathic to the needs of their clients, but instead they're led to be basically not seeing important gender differences even when they're clinically important. So we're left with what Martin has called male gender blindness, what Rick Bradford has called the gender empathy gap, which is where you're kind of blind to differences in the experiences of men and women. For example, in terms of suicide, you just don't see it. And there's a kind of, if something bad happens to a woman, we're more likely to have some sort of sympathy or empathy for that person than if the same thing happens to a man. So all the list of workplace deaths and all those other things, that they could be examples of where we see gender empathy gaps in daily life. Okay, so now here's the new data add, and some of this is kind of interesting. We want to find out from men and women what they liked about various types of therapies, like whether they liked cognitive behavioral therapy more than psychodynamic therapy, what type of therapist they like, what kind of conditions they wanted to do the therapy in. We just thought it would be important maybe to kind of throw it out to the general public all these questions and see what they said. So this is quite exploratory. So we asked them, we asked about 250 men and women, if you had a mental health problem, what kind of treatment would you prefer? And we controlled for various variables that could explain it to some degree, like we control for things like age and educational level. And we found, annoyingly for people like Janet Hyde, quite likely, that women significantly preferred, it's not a massive difference, but statistically significantly preferred psychodynamic type therapies. So when they were asked how much they liked them, they said that they liked them more than men said they liked them. Whereas men said that they significantly preferred support groups more than women. Okay, so these are significant differences in preferences for therapy. We asked other things, so other aspects of therapy, like in general group therapy. Men also preferred group therapy in general, and that's controlling for lots of other factors. Sex differences in coping strategies. So women significantly liked self-help books as a way of coping with stress more than men. They liked to talk with friends significantly more than men did. and they like to procreate significantly more than men do. We're taking up arts and crafts more than men, or prescription medication. Men, on the other hand, as ways of dealing with stress, like significantly more than women playing Xbox with their friends. Trigger warning, the next one. Cover your eyes if you're sensitive. Have sex or use pornography as a way of coping with stress. So the triggers to help seeking are important too, because a lot of men who commit suicide might not commit suicide if they were able to seek help more effectively. So we're interested in the triggers to help seeking. Women said that they went to seek help when they became aware that they needed help, and that then when it had an impact on their daily life. So they said that they did these things significantly more than men said that they did. Whereas men said, more than women, that they said that in general, men don't admit to their problems. So we also try and fix the problems ourselves. And interestingly, men more than women said there are no male-friendly options in therapy. Okay, now should we be listening to this? I mean, I think perhaps we should. Maybe these are just annoying sex differences that we should just not take any notice of. So, do people want a male therapist? This was something that came up in the British Psychological Society's journal recently. The question came up, men are underrepresented in psychology, we need more male therapists. So when we asked our kind of general public what they thought, most people, about 2/3 of men and women, didn't mind whether it was a male or female therapist. And kind of proportionally more women preferred a female therapist than men said we'd like a female therapist. But then significantly more men than women said they prefer a male therapist. Now this is significantly more men than women prefer a male therapist. The numbers aren't huge here, so it's only 17% of men said they prefer a male therapist. So it's a minority of men, but then again, this could be the men who maybe are most at risk. We don't really know. This is for another study to find out. But all we can see is that there are certainly fewer male therapists than there are female therapists. And when we ask men in the general public, they're saying, oh, by the way, about half of the people in the survey had been in therapy before, and half of them had experienced mental health problems. So these are people who kind of, at least half of them have some experience of this, and they prefer a male therapist. Okay, so we did ask, for those who might be interested in research methods and statistics, we did ask people a lot of questions. We threw a load of questions at people about various aspects of therapy, and not all of them came up significant. And if I was Janet Hyde, I would be saying, well, in most cases there was no sex difference. So men and women's needs in therapy or their interest in therapy, yeah, there's nothing there. In fact, you would expect 3 significant sex differences out of the number of variables we were asking about to occur by chance. In fact, we found 15 different sex differences, which is fairly well above chance. And interestingly enough, it's similar to a study that looked at, in 2011, looked at sex differences in outcomes in psychological treatments for depression. So there might be something there. Okay, so one other question then is, if men don't go to therapy, are they, I mean, maybe they're going somewhere else for some sort of ad hoc kind of therapy instead, or they're doing something that they find useful and stress relieving for them. And this has been put into the kind of concept of therapy. Behavioral activation therapy is about finding out what people enjoy doing and then encouraging them to do that. Often when you're depressed, you stop doing the things that you normally enjoy doing. So that's a kind of like a therapy without any real therapy in a sense. An interesting study few years ago found that middle-aged men in Glasgow got quite a lot of a sense of therapeutic value from going down the pub and talking to their friends. Really interesting paper, and it kind of makes sense when you read it. Like when you have a couple of drinks, you might open up a little bit more, talk a bit more about your feelings and your issues. And it's a kind of a safe kind of environment in some ways, because people are expected to do that a bit. So men's sheds is a kind of popular thing now, where I think men's sheds would definitely not describe themselves as any kind of therapy, but it's just a place where men can go and what you might call potter around, doing various things like making furniture together. And in the process of just doing something together, they chat a bit and say how they feel, or kind of, things like that they wouldn't normally feel like doing if you just sat them down and asked them how they feel. Another one that came up at the conference last year was the idea that black men actually like to chat and kind of have deal with their problems at the barber shop. And when I first heard that, I just thought, I don't really believe that, because I hate going to the barber. It's just boring, it's slightly tedious, and I don't really like talking to the barber either. Usually, it's kind of annoying. It slightly makes me cringe slightly, especially if there's a bit of a queue. So, but I thought, okay, I'm a psychologist and researcher. I should maybe investigate this and see whether maybe these black guys do in fact get some sort of well-being benefits from this sort of going to the barber. So we did a study. It's just about to be published in Email Studies in a couple of weeks' time. We asked 200 people their opinions about going to a barber shop and how much they got out of it and what they did when they got there, and basically asked them in various ways about how much they felt better as a result of going to a barber shop. So we found that controlling for age, black men socialise and talk more at the hairstylists or barbers, significantly more than white men or black or white women. And the talk, importantly, was about health or personal issues. And it's kind of slightly nice graph here. Even if you don't like graphs, this tells you a lot. This is how much you socialise and talk at the hairstylist. And this is like the lower numbers mean you like it less. This is me down here, basically. This is black guys having a great time. They're having a much better time than me. This is women who are white and women who are black, who kind of seem to have, according to the study, exactly the same sort of level of chatting and socialising. But I think there's maybe something quite important going on there. And quite apart from me feeling a bit envious of these black guys having a much better time without their haircut, I think that there really might be something worth investigating there in terms of using the potential of everyday activities as ways of offering men some sort of relief from whatever sort of stress they're experiencing, and not expecting them just to sort of, turn up to a psychotherapist or a counselor or something like that, because that doesn't seem to be working too well. So I think we're back to the conclusions. So it's about, I think, it's brilliant that you're all here. It really is. I mean, if we did this talk a couple of years ago, we might not have got anybody. It would be me speaking to Martin and Martin speaking back to me. It would be a lonely experience. But it's great that things are taking off to some degree, and the fact that we have a second International Men's Day debate in Parliament is something to really feel encouraged by. And I suppose in conclusion, I think this thing of male gender blindness, not being able to see that when issues are facing men, I think is a really important barrier. And we have to, I guess it's up to people like us whose eyes are opened a bit, to be able to talk to other people and maybe, if necessary, challenge other people to see things a bit more clearly. And maybe in a few years' time, it will become the norm for people to say, hang on a second, the suicide rate in this country is a bit higher, and this area is a bit high, and it seems to be mainly males. What are you doing about that? And talking to the government, saying, look, you're trying to We've got policies for all sorts of other health issues. Why aren't you doing this about suicide? And it's hard for them, specifically about male suicide. So, I'm not going to kind of go on about that, but just to say that if you do want to see all the notes and briefings that they're going to be talking about in Parliament today, or have been talking about in Parliament today, you can download them for free from here. And this presentation itself will go onto the Male Psychology website, so you can access it. The talk will be on the website in maybe a week or 2 weeks, depending on how quickly we can get it posted up there. But do visit the website. You can download the various papers we've been talking about today, and hopefully, if you are interested in counselling or psychology or helping people who are having mental distress, helping men and boys who are having mental distress, I should say, you might even consider signing up to become a member of the Male Psychology Network. It's a kind of broad church, and I think we can all work together very effectively to move things forward. So, Martin, would you like to
No, I think we've said it all, and we've gone 8 o'clock, so we probably need to wind up. Just to thank everyone for coming and for making this an enjoyable experience. And obviously, we have probably, if people have 1 or 2 questions, maybe we should take a couple of questions, because we've been throwing all this stuff at you. So, does anyone have any quick points?
Yeah, I have a question about the importance of how we conceptualise the gender differences and I can hear my own voice. How we think about where the gender differences came from, because in a couple of times in this talk and also in your article from the BPS gender issue, you said that perhaps it's time to respect these gender phenomena as genuine differences within the human condition rather than as mere social stereotypes. And I guess my question is, what difference does it make to consider them as coming about through biological drives rather than being socially constructed? Could you not perhaps view them as socially constructed but still real and still worth the time to be thought about, and still not something that you can force a man to change or to fit within a feminized model? Like, just because you see them as coming about through social constructionism doesn't necessarily mean that you consider them less real. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah. If we're making the point about social construction, we're not certainly not making the point that that is less real. It's just the level at which we've got to deal with something. So the way I'm looking, the way I'm sort of framing our whole talk tonight is that we need to socially construct our attitudes to masculinity differently. So I'm arguing that we should reconstruct our attitudes to masculinity, and that is very real, because our attitudes to masculinity are changeable, and it's our attitudes to masculinity that are probably the greatest barrier. But clearly, things, the human species, as I see it, as biological, psychological, social, political and spiritual, I think all of those elements are important. They all interact, so we're not trying to play down the importance of social constructions, but what we're trying to do is redress the balance a little bit, because it's so often talked about as a social construction gender that we need to sort of redress that balance. For example, even if you assumed if some of these things were socially constructed, then we've got to think about why we're doing that. And also, male children are largely socialised by adult females, and we've got to think, well, if we're socially constructing gender in these ways, why is that happening? Do you see what I mean? The largest part of influence over young males is adult females. So we're communicating and transmitting stuff then. But the important thing is that social constructions are. I mean, someone who's deluded and psychotic a delusion is real. Any belief is real. If you believe something, it's real for you. So the important thing is that we're not playing down the importance of social construction, but for me, if we're splitting gender from its biological heritage. The other way of looking at it is it's mind-body. We're really saying that the body is biological sex and the mind is gender. If you look at it in that crude way, are we really saying our minds and our bodies are separate? I think they're much more intertwined than that. So I would say the psychology of gender has got to be connected with the biology of sex, and we've got to sort of link the two rather than split them off. And certainly in psychology generally, we've got it the wrong way around. In mental health, we think people are suffering from biological illnesses, but in gender, we've got a sort of a belief that gender is more fluid, whereas mental health is somehow biologically determined. So we've got it completely the wrong way around. So yeah, these things have to be debated, but you're totally right. It doesn't matter whether it's constructed or in some way part of an archetype. It's still got to be addressed. It's still a genuine difference. So I think you're quite right about that.
Yeah, I think it's a very good question. And I do agree, it kind of is irrelevant in a way, like where it comes from. It's just addressing it is an important thing. As an aside, I do think there's a very good book by Professor Melissa Hines, who's based at Oxford, called Brain Gender. And that's about how it's an interaction between the two things. It's a bit of nature and it's a bit of nurture. It's not just nature or not, and it's not just nurturing. But it's very evidence-based for the influence of both on gender.
So you made it clear that we should adapt our therapies towards the sex differences between the genders, but do you not also think it's important to acknowledge the role that culture plays and society plays in very much forcing the ideas from a young age in boys that, especially fairy tales and stories, that boys should be strong and hide their feelings and not express themselves, and sort of see the side that is also very harmful, and not just acknowledge that, yeah, there's sex differences and we should adapt to them, but also try to destroy the society that builds on those sex differences and amplifies them.
Yeah, I absolutely think that if you look at male, I suppose if you look at cultural, there is cultural change, and I suppose we are looking at working from both directions. So definitely we want to enable men to feel good about expressing and dealing with their emotional lives as much as possible culturally. But this is what we're proposing, that to do that we need to do it in a way that also fits, so that you're getting a win-win. You're getting cultural change by using the archetype to go with the kind of cultural. So by creating services that are more male-friendly, you will have more men talking about their feelings, because they'll be feeling more honoured, and they'll be going into more therapy, and therefore they'll be starting to talk more, and it'll be accepted as a male-friendly thing to do. But because you come in at it from both ends, you're going to be more likely to succeed. Whereas the danger is by just coming in at the cultural end, you're going to sort of make men feel under pressure to be different. So you can get a win-win there. Obviously, what I said earlier is true, that suicide rates are different in every culture. So there is something inherent in the species. Every single culture, the suicide rates are much higher. There's something in our species that needs to be addressed. And each, obviously, you've got to do it in a way that's culturally sensitive. But if you can allow men to come in a way that honours those ancient kind of universal species-based aspects of masculinity, then you will find you will get as much change as you can get in terms of feeling honoured to talk about feelings. Because I think, Michael, you were saying in Transport for London, these guys came in to talk about nutrition to a female nutritionist in